Hi everyone, Patricia Worby, Alchemy Therapies here, and I'm delighted to introduce you to my great and long-time friend, Jessica Woods, who describes herself as an energy intuitive, and we're going to find out a bit more about what that actually means. Now, Jessica and I have known each other probably 10, 12 years, something like that. Jessica used to live in the UK, very near me on the south coast, and has now moved to New Zealand. So joining us from New Zealand today. So it's wonderful to be able to communicate like this. And I'm so glad you agreed to this conversation with me. Now, my memory is that I came to you for a reading one time when I was going through quite a personal crisis in my life. And I have to say, I was a little skeptical because that's my nature, because I'm a scientist and, you know, I come from a very left brain kind of area. And I remember sitting down with you and I thought, I'm not going to give her any clues. I'm not going to give her any clues. She's going to have to work this out herself. And you came out with the most amazing stuff. You identified my grandmother. You described her perfectly. And the problems that had occurred in my family line, and you gave me some great advice about where I was at. I remember you saying I was at a crossroads in my life, spot on, you know, and what would be occurring for me. And funnily enough, one of your prophecies, which is now coming true, is that I'll be working in other countries. Okay, and I had originally thought, oh, well, that means I'm going to travel the world, you know. It turns out I'm going to be doing exactly what we're doing tonight. So welcome, and perhaps you'd start off by telling me a little bit about how you got to be doing what you do. How did it begin?
Oh, well, first of all, I want to say how great to connect here on Zoom, because as you said, we didn't get to see each other before I left the UK. So here I am on the other side of the world. And yeah, it's lovely. It's great to talk. So yeah, how did I get into doing what I'm doing? Well, actually, I guess my guides when I was really young, really young, and there were many of them. They used to come in different guises, so to speak. So they used to teach me and show me a lot of things, and I thought it was normal. I thought everybody had these guides, and you know, and it was just normal stuff. I used to do a lot of what, you know, I later kind of realized was astral planing, and, you know, leaving my body and actually physically seeing it, and seeing you know, what people call poltergeists, spirits, that sort of thing. You know, I thought that was normal stuff, until I realized that it really wasn't. So I guess it was probably in me, and from, you know, from a very early age I had some very unusual experiences. I remember frightening the life out of a group of friends when we were about 9 years old, when I channeled an entity, and they were like, when I came out of it, I wasn't consciously aware of what had been said, and I remember them sort of like, their faces were white and said, what happened, you know, you spoke in this deep voice and you gave us all this information, and what, we don't know what you were talking about. So I remember being a bit cautious after that about saying things to people, and you know, I spoke to my guide and said, don't ever let that happen again. So I was always then not the channel, so to speak, that you know, allowed that to happen. So it came through in different ways. It used to come through in vibrational messages. So that's really how I've, you know, when you spoke about, you had a reading with me years ago, that's what I do. I pick up the frequencies and vibrations of different energies, hence energy intuitive, and excuse me, and, you know, pass those messages on to people.
Yeah.
And yeah, so that's kind of what I do. And over the years, you know, I bring in many other elements of that. And I guess the main thing which I've been doing with clients for quite some years is, you know, I have an ability to be able to read those frequencies and see where there are perhaps distortions. So if people have what I call on their ancestral line or their lineage, or in their DNA, or in the astral realm, or there are so many dimensions and energy spaces, and it's kind of being able to read those frequencies and realize that there's something not quite right. And as I said, let's take an example. If there's something in a past life, I'm kind of aware of that past life. And basically all that I'm doing when I'm working is I'm connecting. My divine self is connecting with the divine self of somebody else, one of my clients or whoever I'm working with, and being able to kind of put light, or a spotlight, so to speak, into those problem areas, those distorted conditioning, patterning, whatever, there's many different ways of describing the energies. And then, just the attention of that light, it's kind of like, shining that spotlight. So it releases that energy. It's no longer needed. In some cases, people have, certainly in the astral plane, I find this, that they have contracts, or some people call it oaths or vows, that they have taken in previous lives, and it's still in their energy system. And of course, it doesn't apply now. Say, for example, a vow of poverty, for example. We live in a very abundant world right now, so we don't need to have these contracts still in place. And I love playing in these realms, actually. I always did as a child, and I still do, where we can go and we can talk to the council or whoever's these contracts have been made with, and renegotiate. And in all cases, they're up for it. I say they, it all sounds a bit bizarre, as I said, but it's a really it's funny how to talking about this and describing it to you, because it's not something I usually talk about. I just do it. But exactly. I'm giving you examples of what I do as an energy intuitive.
Brilliant. Well, I've experienced it, so I'm sold already. But what I'd like to do is maybe put that in a more academic, scientific frame for people, because I know there'll be a lot of people. I interview a lot of people on my channel, and some are very sciencey and some are very left field, and I span both of those. I have a very great interest in data and correlations and science, but I also have this amazing awareness that the spiritual side of the human is so important to health and well-being, and it's actually become vindicated by quantum physics to a large extent now. What you're describing, that you call it the astral plane, some people call it the biofield, it's the field of information that surrounds the human being, that we are a result of that biofield, and we carry imprints from past lives or early childhood experiences in that biofield, and we kind of download them, and we're programmed, basically. You said a sort of vow, or you make a sort of a vow of poverty or whatever, and it is like the program is running you. And I think what you're describing is going in and saying, oh, can we renegotiate? I love that. Renegotiate. Can we change this? Can we change it? Because it's no longer working for this person. And certainly that has been my experience through life. I've had a number of crises in my life. I know I'm not alone in that, where I thought everything was fine, and then something happens and you get a chronic illness, or you have a bad accident, or you have a relationship breakdown, and you're not sure why it's happening and you don't understand it. And I think people like yourself, you can go in and illuminate it. And you use the word shining light. You illuminate what's going on from a very higher perspective. So it's not about, oh, you need to do this, this, and this, and take this pill, or do this action. It's like, where is the biggest energy imprint, and what can we do? So it's amazing work you do, and you are gifted. One other thing I want to say from what you said was this very early experience in your life. You just had this ability, okay? I believe there is a theory around that. The pineal gland in the brain, it seems, is the basis of our third eye. And when you are very young, up to about the age of 7, you have very high levels of a chemical called DMT, which is activated by another chemical called pinealine. And it enables us to have this telepathic ability, this ability to see and sense things, which is why children have great imagination, and they're able to channel stuff, and you clearly had that. But what's different about you is yours didn't close down, which is what happens to most children around the age of 7. It starts to calcify the pineal gland. So yours hasn't. So you have this ability to connect with other realms, if you like, and yet you look completely normal.
I'm glad I look normal, whatever normal is.
I'm joking. So you say it's hard to describe because it's putting into words something that you feel, isn't it? So take me through a consultation with someone, assuming that the people watching here wouldn't have a clue. What would you do with somebody?
Yeah, I just want to add something there that you'd said, picked up on about the science of things as well before I say that, because I think it's really important, because the two marry really, really well together, because really ultimately everything is energy, and from a scientific point of view, I don't understand it, but you would, you'd understand how these chemical reactions, and how we're all made up from energy. So I think that's really important, because if you're the people that are listening to this, if they're scientific or they're more spiritual, they're a bit of a combination. We're all of it, really. It's just, as I said, which side we prefer to kind of develop it, so to speak.
Sure.
But when I'm doing a consultation with someone or a session with someone, what I'm doing is they have come to me, so they want to. They've got a problem, or they want to change an aspect of themselves. And what I do is help people to reconnect to their divine state, as I call it, or source. Some people call it higher self. That's my intention. So when I'm working, first of all, that's where I'm working from. I'm connected to that myself, and then whoever I'm working with, whatever they believe in, or wherever they're at, is to really kind of, I'm just trying to describe this really in a way that would make sense. So because I never know, every person is obviously very unique. So their experience, every single session will be different. So if I have a repeat client, every single session that I have with them will be different. It will never be the same. But basically what I do is they've come to me, so they've given me permission to read their energy. And that's exactly what I do. I read their energy, and I will be taken on a journey as equally as much as they are. And some people, I know there are many energy healers. I work with a lot of them myself, and everybody has their different style. Mine is very much, I like to communicate with people. I like to tell them what I'm seeing. So if, let's say, I'm reading this energy, they're just, like you and I are right now, there's just communication happening, and say, right, okay, so I'm picking up on a past life. Again, I'll use that as an example because it's a very easy one to explain. So I go into that, what I call the soul realm, the astral realm. I'm picking up on that energetically within their field, as I think you might have used the term earlier, field or web or whatever you want to call it. Yeah. So in their field, they have a resonance that I'm attracted to, and I see it for what it is. And in some cases, it can be the whole lifetime in a flash, and sometimes it's just it pauses like a still. So I get an image of something, and then I go deeper into that image or that still, energetically speaking, and I'm able to pinpoint that they were, for example, they were chained up in a cellar, or whatever you would have called them in those days. Let's take an Egyptian life or something like that, and they were you know, or they were killed for it because, you know, and then I can see that happening or whatever. So when I say see, I sense it all. I am visual, but I'm very kinesthetic, as you rightly pointed out. I'm a very, you know, I work very much with emotions and feelings, and that's how I read the energy. And so whatever's there. But once, let's say we've identified that, you know, they were an Egyptian life and they were chained up, you know, and it wasn't a particularly good experience for them, then that resonance, that's what's calling me. That's saying to me, look, this needs sorting, because this person will find that they can't speak up now in this lifetime because that one they were suppressed. You know, when they did speak up, that's why they were chained up, as an example. So once that's released from their energetic field, and as I said, shining a spotlight on it, illumination, whatever you want to call it, it's just bringing it into the divine self, because when you're working in that light, nothing that is of a lower frequency can exist. So it's transformed, so to speak.
Okay.
So that's what we're doing. We're transforming that experience, so it removes it so that it has no effect in their current life situation. So people that couldn't speak up find that then after the session, and I'm not saying it's immediate, they may not even recognize it was associated with what we've done. And I find that my work is so subtle that quite often people don't even realize that, you know, they wouldn't attribute to that. I'm not interested in that. All I'm interested in is that that's been cleared, and at some point they find themselves suddenly, you know, let's take, you know, an example of somebody who couldn't speak up, and then suddenly they get their own, you know, radio show, or they find that they suddenly become a leader in their field, and that they're you know, giving meetings and things like that. That's not unusual, because that's what happens when we clear these distortions and, you know, this patterning and this conditioning. We then become more of who we truly are. And I think that's a good way to describe, you know, really what happens in a session. So people will then leave, you know, most people, whether they're conscious of it or not, immediately say, God, I feel so much lighter. I feel so much clearer. But all that's happening is their divine self, as I said, their soul self is connecting with them.
Yeah.
And then that's the energy that they're feeling.
Yeah. Yeah. You and I work in similar fields, but we use a different method. Okay, and some of the terminology you're using, you know, you call it the divine self, I call it the real self, or the person you were born to be, you know, the consciousness.
Yeah.
And then there's the adapted self, and I use my hands and I say, you've been like this, you know, you've aligned with the adapted self, and you need to realize that the real self is infinite and magical and alive and vital.
Yeah.
And by opening up the gap, that's what I do. I open up the gap between those two things and remove this alignment with the you that you have become because of your limitations. You are lifted. You have the burden taken away, whatever burden that was. And I know for me, you said the effects are subtle. So I drove away from my session with you realizing for the first time the weight of expectation and burden on me from my grandmother to my mother to me. And you correctly identified that chain, and you said, you're at the end of the chain, and the reason you haven't had children is because you need to break the chain, because it was a female to female line. And you told me that my grandmother and my mother had always had a complicated and difficult relationship. And that was so true, because my grandmother gave my mum away, and she was a twin, and she kept the other twin. And so she separated her from her twin sister. And the legacy of that now is so interesting, because my mum has outlived her twin, and she's outlived her brother. She's the last of her line because she was raised by her grandmother and not by her mum. Because it turns out her grandmother was a more loving, kind person. So she's had that extra love and care. But the
Wow.
legacy for me was that I felt the burden of being the daughter, because I'm an only daughter. I've got a brother, but no other sisters.
Yeah.
That I would have to bear that burden of expectation of being perfect, because my mum never had. She wasn't perfect for her own mum. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
She
Yeah.
wasn't good enough. She was given away. And I remember you saying your grandmother's here, but you call her Nan, don't you? And I was like, yes, I do, because and people have different words for family members, and she was a big lady and she had bad knees, and I'm like, yes, and yes. And she said, you said she wants to say she's sorry, and it just was. It was like taking a lid off something for me that I hadn't even realised was a burden, but I'd carried that all my life in a sort of imprint of how I was never quite enough.
Yeah.
Doesn't
And
matter
yes,
how. Yes,
that's how
so
it would have manifested for you.
exactly. And
And the interesting thing is, can I just add something
yeah,
there
yeah,
to what you're saying is, and I think this is really lovely for people to know that when we heal ourselves, and that's really what we're doing when we're doing that, we're coming back to ourselves, remembering more and whatever, but we're also that lineage, that line, it's wonderful to see all the ancestors who benefit from it. It's like a knock-on effect. I see it like a timeline, like where and it sort of like goes along, and then they all shout back down this timeline, all the ancestors, all the grandparents and the whoever, and they all shout, thank you, thank you, thank you, and things like that. And it's just amazing. And then I love to pass that back on to the client and say, this is, and can you imagine how wonderful that is? And it's exactly what you're describing. You break that pattern, but you're not just ending it there. What you're doing is you're helping all the generations that have gone before you to awaken, so that as they come, if they choose to come back into a physical body, or whichever dimension they choose to be conscious, aware of, it has this amazing effect. So it's like, wonderful.
It's because it's energy, it's instantaneous, and it travels it forwards and backwards in time. And this is what we understand by a quantum effect, is it's not limited by space and time, and it's instantaneous. So I tell you again, a personal thing is that it transformed my relationship with my mum, which I am so grateful for, because throughout my life I'd always been quite resentful, quite closed off from her, quite protective of myself, because I felt like I could never be enough, so what was the point in giving anything? And that is coming so handy now, because as she's got older, and unfortunately she's got a bit of dementia now, and so I can be forgiving, I can be loving, I can be close to her in a way that I never could as I was a child growing up. I rejected her completely. And so you're right, it doesn't just affect this lifetime, the one I'm living, or the person that you're working with, it affects all the previous as well. And I could feel that as I drove home. I could feel that energy going all the way back up, like, as you say, a lifting. It's so fantastic what you do, Jessica.
And you also, and isn't it wonderful? Because we can see that those people, the so-called, it's all because of them. Quite often people, it's a natural thing for humans, for all of us, to blame others and to kind of like push it all away. It's all someone else's fault, and all that's doing is keeping us like really trapped,
stuck,
and stuck, and no one benefits from that. No one, least of all ourselves. But as you say, our mothers and the generations that have gone either way, because as I say, there is no time either, is there, really? If we clap it all in,
it's all instantaneous. So we're going through a physical lifetime right now, because that's kind of how our brains decode. I think that's how I understand life. But in reality, time is stacked. It's not linear. It's all at once. So really, we need to live our best lives, and I think you encourage people to do that. by releasing these imprints that are unconsciously stored in them. And so it's a wonderful job. You must have fantastic job satisfaction.
No, I don't call it
No,
work.
I know you don't.
I really don't.
It's a joy.
It is a joy. I feel so blessed. And at the moment, I just want to, obviously, if you don't mind, bring us to the current situation, what's happening here.
Yeah.
And there is, I know a lot of people say, oh, you're just so positive all the time. No, I'm not. I have feelings, and I don't always feel good, and sometimes I wake up feeling quite sad or whatever. I'm a normal human being, same as everyone else. But what I would say is, yes, there is a lot of really not good things happening at the moment. And what I want to just say, though, is there's also so many good things that are happening. We've always got that choice, haven't we? We can look at the negativity, the dark, or we can look at the positivity and the light. But there's never been a more opportune time for us to connect, as I say, with our source self, than now. And can I use an example? You mentioned, prior to us, talking here, that there's at the moment in the UK, because you were kind of giving me an idea of what's happening over there and was it happening here, and it's happening, globally, I'm sure, that police are saying to people, leaning in cars and go back home, what are you doing here, and all that sort of thing. And yes, that is, deemed as somebody's coming into my space and they're telling me what to do. Now, that's not a nice feeling, is it? Because obviously that's, nobody wants to be told what to do. As I said, we just want to reject it or run away from it or whatever we're doing. But there's another way of looking at it. At the moment, we're given an opportunity to be as still as we can. And when we can be as still as we can, the energy from what we've been talking about, our divine self, it's a really opportune time to stay at home and not be feeling controlled, but because you can use that time, use it to really sit and meditate or talk to yourself. However you want to do that. I encourage people to have that inner dialogue. How do I feel about being at home now, told that I've got to go back home? Well, not very good, really. And have that conversation, and then but what's the benefit of this? And turning everything around. And this is what I was trying to say earlier. It's like, if there's a negative, yes, that exists. It's your reality, and it doesn't make you feel good. But don't hang on to it. See what's the positive in that. What is the positive of staying at home and not being able to get out right now? There will come a time very soon when you will be able to. But right now, this is being forced on us for a reason. It's given us, as I see it, the opportunity to,
to realign. Be who we are, realign with that. Yes, and I think the opportunities are huge. Unfortunately, the fear and the shame and those kinds of negative energies are around. And I think
it's time to let them out, you see, now.
Exactly. We have
to work through this, let it out.
I think we have to work through it. We have to have a dialogue as a community, as professionals particularly. I think we have the opportunity is huge to talk about this, and I know I'm doing that a lot. I'm doing some coronavirus diaries, as I call them, where I'm talking about what you can do to stop being a passive recipient of bad news and start dynamically interacting with yourself and with the world, and treating your body as a holy thing, and protecting yourself, but in a positive way rather than as a sort of passive person waiting to get infected. It's just so perfect time for us to awaken and start to do this work more and more, and yes, we can do more of it. So
I think it's time for people to break the illusion of separation, and this is what
beautiful.
This perfect time is about right now.
We're not we're not separate, we're not individuals, we're not I's competing for limited resources. We are divine beings linked, we are one, in fact, but in separate bodies right now. But our spiritual existence is, we are one, and we need to act accordingly. So
Yeah,
beautiful,
so
beautiful.
absolutely, this time for retreat is so that you know, we can find that inner truth. So let's
Wow,
use this time, use it
beautiful.
wisely, and then we will, you know, as you say, the collective, we will realize that we are a collective. And those positive things that are being put out there are saying that, aren't they? Yeah, we might be separate, but you know, actually we're all one. And look how people are still communicating.
Yeah,
Awesome times, really
awesome.
are.
Yeah, and that's a beautiful moment, I think, to draw us to a close. Thank you so much. It was so nice to communicate and connect with you again, and to have your positive light. And we talk a lot about spin at the moment, you know, politicians and spin, but you are a light. You're different. You speak from your heart, and it is so welcome at a time when so much feels very, very controlled and tight and limited, to have an expansive view of what's going on. So thank you. I'd love to talk with you again at some point. I think we will repeat this. But for now, I want to thank you so much. How can people contact you if they want to connect with you?
Probably the best way is through my email at the moment, because I'm literally about to launch a new website. I'm just negotiating the domain for that, so it will be changing. So if I give you one, it will be irrelevant. So the best is my email address, which is jessicayourdestiny@gmail.com.
Brilliant.
Or you can find me on Facebook as Jessica Woods Energy Intuitive.
Excellent. Well, thank you again, and lovely to speak with you. And people, please subscribe and support both myself and Jessica. Thank you for listening. Bye for now.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Bye.